Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 290 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to look at some practical ways to build trust in your team, along with a handy equation to help you to think about trust and what you might do to build it. So let's get into this episode right now. So if you've listened to last week's episode, which was 289, you would know that I went through some research on what makes for a high-performing team, fairly recent research, and McKinsey, their research came up with trust as one of the biggest factors of a high-performing team, and Google's research in Project Aristotle came up with psychological safety as the most important factor in a high-performing team. And then Google's next most important factor was dependability as well. And these are all ingredients that lead to trust. So it's pretty clear that trust in a team is one of the biggest factors based on recent research. And my experience with teams as well is trust is something that helps people work more easily together, feel safer calling each other out for poor performance or behavior as well. And generally, a high degree of trust in a team will mean that people can rely on each other, and also that people can feel safe to admit when they're wrong or admit when they've made a mistake, and that information won't be used against them. So in this episode, I want to talk about an equation that's quite handy. And this has been around for a little while. It's from a company called Trusted Advisor, and it's called the trust equation. And the equation goes something like this. It's basically trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, all divided by what they call self-orientation, which basically means your self-interest. So credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, all divided by self-orientation. I'll put a link to that trust equation in the show notes page, which will be thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/290, or you can see that on the show notes in Spotify or other apps as well. Now, I want to get through these factors one by one and think about, okay, how could you use this equation to try to build the level of trust in your team? Because we know from the research that trust is one of the most important factors in team performance. So let's start with these factors. So the first one is credibility. So credibility is basically, well, does the person appear credible in their role? So in a work setting, this might be, do they have the skills, the qualifications, the confidence to actually do their job effectively or be perceived as a credible person? So that's a really important one. And when you think about this from a team level, you might think, well, how would I increase credibility of the people in my team? Well, there's a few things you could look at here. First one is you could look at making sure that your team has the applicable qualifications and training so that they have the best chance of being a credible person or playing a credible role in that team. So if you think about the opposite, where someone in the team doesn't really have the skills or the capability that's required to do their role effectively, their credibility in the eyes of other team members will be reduced, which means that other team members will think, well, why did that person have the job? They can't even do their role effectively. And that's where trust starts to go down. So for the credibility factor, what you want to do is help your team members be seen as credible in their roles, which means having clear roles and responsibilities, making sure they're trained and have the right skills and capabilities, and the qualifications that are relevant to their roles as well. So that's credibility. Now, the second factor was reliability. So the top line there, credibility plus reliability. Now, reliability is basically being able to deliver consistently and to do what you say you're going to do. So here is where you might want to make sure that you're holding your team members accountable and they're taking ownership of what they say they're going to do and they're part of the process in the team. And so reliability is an interesting one because some people are inherently more reliable than others. But to support your team members in being more reliable, I would look at a few different factors. The first one would be, can you help your team members feel confident to commit to their deadlines or their goals that they're setting? So basically, making sure they're not taking on too much, making sure they're not trying to overpromise or underpromise, and making sure they can hit those targets that they've said they will. And partially credibility is part of that as well, right? We said before, skills, capability, qualifications, that can help with reliability as well. So reliability, what you want is to set up a situation where your team can reliably deliver consistently. So for me, that's about setting clear expectations, having clear goals, and making those goals achievable for the team members as well, because otherwise they could be seen as unreliable. You also might look at making sure their workloads are not too overwhelming, because people with an overwhelming workload are unlikely to be reliable. Because even if they do deliver for a certain amount of time, if someone's burnt out and overworked, it's likely, eventually they'll become sick or they'll quit or something like that, which means you're lacking that reliability. So really it's about workload, getting them to commit to realistic goals as well. Another thing you might try is, and I spoke about it a couple of episodes back, was taking a coaching approach. So for someone to be reliable, they need to take ownership and take accountability and commit to what they say they're going to do. And a coaching approach can help with that, because when you start asking your team rather than just telling them what to do all the time, you start to build that ownership and connection with the team. So they're more likely to step up and take accountability. Now, the third factor that trusted advisors say is the top part of the trust equation is intimacy. So intimacy is really about how close the team members feel to each other and whether the team member feels safe confiding in them or sharing information, for example. So this has real parallels with psychological safety, which was one of those big factors in the Google research about high-performing teams. So if you have a high degree of intimacy with someone, you are likely to confide in them. You're likely to tell them where you're not feeling confident, or maybe you admit you made a mistake, or maybe you'll tell them about a new idea you've got because you're comfortable sharing that information. In the opposite example, if you had a low degree of intimacy, it would be, well, I'm going to keep my information close to my chest because I'm worried that that person might do something with it, or I don't feel safe enough to open up to that person. So intimacy for me in a team is all about connection. And there was a really nice quote I came across recently, which really sums this up well, from Dr. Gabor Mate. And he says basically, I'm paraphrasing a little bit though, that safety does not come from an absence of threat, but it comes from the presence of connection. So it doesn't come from the absence of threat, it comes from the presence of connection. So in other words, you might still have people in the team who feel uneasy or anxious or unsafe because, they're under pressure, maybe they don't think they can deliver, all those sorts of things. They might be underconfident. But if you create enough connection between those team members, that is going to be enough to make people feel safe enough so that they can confide in others or open up or provide new ideas, suggestions, whatever it might be. So I think that's really interesting because sometimes when we talk about psychological safety, we think, well, we need to make it the safest environment. And so sometimes when I'm leading workshops and training, there's a temptation that some trainers or facilitators have, which is to say, this is a safe environment. And you'll notice if you're ever in a session with me, I will never, ever say, this is a safe environment. Now, why don't I say that? Because I cannot make you feel safe. I can only create an environment in which you are more likely to feel safe. And what feels safe for one person may be different than another. And so, what you really want to be doing in a team to help people overcome their feelings of that lack of safety is create connection. So, connection in a team is really, for me, it's quite simple. It's getting people to know each other better, to understand each other, to find information out about each other, maybe personal information, information from their personal lives and their home lives. And it can actually build that little connection between people so they understand that they have more in common. They have some things in common, common ground, you might call it. And that means you're gradually building these connections. People can see how they're similar to other people in the team in different ways. And that can help to build that connection and that intimacy according to the trust equation. So, how would you build that connection? Well, it's interesting because there's a couple of little activities I've used in the past when I'm running workshops or training and I'm doing some team coaching work to build this connection. And one of them is very simple. And I've written about it before in one of my articles, but I think it's worth reiterating. An easy one is, okay, get everyone in the team to bring a personal item that holds significance for them. So bring it to your next team meeting or something like that. And then everyone in the team is going to talk about their personal item and why it's significant for 1 to 2 minutes. And as the leader, you should go first to set the example that this is okay and you're willing to open up about your personal object or item that you find significant to you. Now, obviously, if that person's item is a car, don't get them to bring the car in. Probably a picture is sufficient. But you know what I mean. So what this does over time is it just builds these little connections because you might find out things about other people that you don't expect. And most of the time when I've done this activity with people, they bring in things that are nothing to do with work. So it shows you a glimpse of the person outside of the workplace that you may not get to see. The other reason I like this activity is because you're not telling someone to talk about something they're not comfortable with. They get to choose the object and they get to choose the story that they tell and the one that they're comfortable telling to the team. And so it's a really powerful way to build that connection. And obviously, you don't just do this once and everyone magically trusts each other. But over time, these sort of little activities can be really useful and they can build that connection. And I do find when I start some sort of workshop with an activity like that, the conversations after that activity are much more in-depth and vulnerable than they might be otherwise. So that's one way to build connection. And you can do a similar activities with what's called a bunch of keys activity, which is, everyone generally has a key ring or a set of keys they bring with them because, house keys and car keys and things like that. So similar to the other one I just mentioned, you get everyone to choose a key on their key ring or something that's on their key ring and tell a story about it. And it might be, how you came across that car, or we drove our car across the country or something like that on a great holiday. So similar way to do that, but it's probably easier to do with a bunch of keys because most people have keys with them when they come to work. So that's intimacy, right? You're trying to build these connections between team members. Another way you might do that is to buddy up team members together, let them work together more closely, and you might even have senior team members mentoring more junior team members. So you're building these connections between the team. And I would also recommend maybe, if you can, shuffle the team members around from time to time, get them to work with different other team members to find out more about how the team works and to build those connections within the team across all parties. So that's that intimacy. Now, the last factor, which is on the bottom of this trust equation, and by being on the bottom, it means that if you have a high score on this factor, then your trust goes down, and it's called self-orientation. Now, this basically means being self-interested. So, for example, if I look like I'm not caring about other people and I just want to hit my own goals or hit my own targets or do my own thing, I'll look like I'm self-oriented, which can destroy trust. So to reduce the potential for this self-orientation, what you want is to build commitment to the team. And I think team goals are a really good way to do this because we all hear about people having individual targets at work, performance targets, and those are fine. But team goals mean that the team has to commit to them together and work together to achieve them. Whereas individual goals, you can get a little bit more competitiveness happening because everyone can be sort of in it for themselves. So team goals are really important in this factor, I think. So team goals mean that team members are more likely to realize that, well, I need to work with my colleagues to get this thing done and to achieve that goal. And so it can build that commitment to the team. And once again, with self-orientation, people tend to be more selfish in my experience when they don't care about the other people around them. And what's a way to get people to care about the people around them? Well, is to build that connection. And what I've noticed in society in general is there's a little bit more these days, there's less community. And I think these days there's a bit more of a mindset of, well, if you're not in my circle of friends or family, then I don't care about you. And so what you want to do in a team is get rid of that feeling. And to do that, you want to build connection. You want to get your team members knowing more about each other so that self-orientation becomes less likely. Because if I know that I'm working with you and we have something in common and I know about you and your family or whatever it is, I'm less likely to try to throw you under the bus, for example, because I see you as a human, not just a competitive resource on my team. So there's just some ideas there from the trust equation, and I think the trust equation is a really powerful one. I really like it as a way of thinking about trust. I'll put the link to the trust equation in the show notes as well so you can see that. And I'd love to hear your ideas on how you build trust in your team. And you can put them as a comment in the show notes page or on your podcast app of choice like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That'd be great. I'd love to hear your suggestions here, and it will help thoughtful leaders, well, build ideas about how to build trust in their own teams as well. So thank you for listening. As usual, if you're interested in working with me one-on-one and we can work on all these trust equation factors and try to build trust in your team to reach that high performance status, then get in touch. You can go to the leadership coaching page, which will be on the show notes as well. And you can book in a call with me there and we can see if coaching might be good for you or your team. All right. Thank you for listening once again. If you have a few seconds, be sure to give this podcast a positive rating in your podcast app of choice. It really helps me get the word out about the podcast and hopefully spread the word to more thoughtful leaders just like you. All righty. Keep up the thoughtful leadership, and I'll be back next week.